I should start with the moment the evening tilted sideways, but honestly, the very first sign that something was off was the breeze on the rooftop. It kept nudging the corner of the tablecloth like it knew a joke I wasn't in on. The candles flickered even before the sun dipped, and I caught myself smoothing the fabric over and over, pretending that if the setup looked perfect, the night would listen and cooperate. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I had spent weeks planning it. The lighting, the arrangement of chairs, the exact placement of the little lanterns. Even the playlist, soft acoustic, nothing too dramatic, was timed so the first song would start the second she stepped out of the elevator. It was the kind of evening you picture in your head when you're young and hopeful, except this one had a skyline view and a bottle of her favorite wine sitting in a chill bucket I rented because I wanted to get every detail right. One of those small touches that you assume people will remember for the rest of their lives. I checked my watch, 6 minutes to 7. She was usually early to everything. She'd show up with that faintly chaotic energy she carried, like she was always half in her next appointment and half in the moment with me. She'd step out, smile at the candles, touch my arm, and I'd drop to one knee. Simple, clean, no theatrics. At 6:57, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. She had a habit of texting parking or elevators slow whenever she was close but impatient. Instead, a single message glowed across the screen. Traffic is horrible. Let's do another night. No emojis, no punctuation besides the period at the end that felt like a tap on the shoulder. I stared at the text for a few seconds longer than I should have, as though the words would rearrange themselves into something reassuring. I glanced over the edge of the rooftop. The main roads trickled steadily along. Not empty, but definitely not jammed. My building wasn't even near the busy district. If she meant highway congestion, maybe. But this wasn't highway territory. This was the calm part of the city, the side streets where the loudest sound was usually someone cursing at a malfunctioning scooter. Something nudged at me. A little instinct I usually ignored because ignoring things had always felt easier. Tonight, the instinct shoved harder. I pulled open our shared rideshare app, one of those simple features you forget exists until suddenly it feels like the hinge to your entire world. We'd linked it months ago for convenience. Convenience had come back to say hello. The map loaded. I blinked. She wasn't anywhere near a highway or even in the quadrant our apartment sat in. She was across town, tucked comfortably inside a high-end restaurant known for oversized windows and overpriced appetizers. The little GPS dot didn't move. She was seated, settled, comfortable. My grip tightened on the phone. A second later, another dot appeared next to hers, a companion's device. I zoomed in lazily, somehow already knowing whose it was. Same name she'd mentioned offhand for weeks. Same coworker she'd insisted was just fun to talk to because he understood her taste in fabrics and patterns. I remembered the way she'd said it with a bright shrug, so casual I didn't want to interrogate the tone behind it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Not a dramatic exhale, just a small release, like something inside me aligned and clicked. I texted back, "Enjoy your evening. Your access to the joint card ends tonight." I didn't wait to see if she read it. Instead, I grabbed the bottle, poured myself a glass, and drank half in one go. The wind kicked up again, brushing the tiny candles as though giving me a gentle pat on the back. Maybe sympathy. Maybe mockery. Hard to tell. I told myself to stay still. Think clearly. Don't get swept in the first wave of panic or disappointment or whatever this feeling was. I wasn't the type to spiral. I was the type who made lists, rearranged furniture, fixed things, and if something couldn't be fixed, I found a replacement that worked better. By the time the sky faded to deep blue, I was past the initial shock and floating in a strange, quiet clarity. It wasn't pleasant, but it was sharp, useful. I canceled the dinner reservation through the rooftop concierge, asked them to remove everything, no explanation, just a polite message and a small tip. Then I opened the website where I'd ordered the custom ring, handcrafted, unique, engraved. I stared at the cancel order button for a second, feeling an absurd spark of frustration at the craftsmanship I would never get to appreciate. Then I clicked. The confirmation email hit my inbox instantly. That's one thing solved, I muttered. The wind kept pushing. I paced once, twice, 3 times around the rooftop before something inside me shifted from hurt to focus. I unlocked my phone again, pulled up the building manager's contact, and sent a message requesting immediate removal of Jenna Cole from my lease. She'd assumed she'd move in after tonight. The manager responded promptly with a polite acknowledgement. Done, I whispered to myself. More solved. It amazed me how crisply my thoughts arranged themselves the moment I stopped pretending things were normal. I'd been forcing normal for months. Every time she tossed her phone face down. Every time her lunches with vendors stretched past reasonable. Every time she sighed when I asked about our future, as though I'd handed her a chore. It wasn't even the restaurant that hurt the most. It was the confirmation that I hadn't imagined the shift. I'd seen it. I'd felt it. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. The last step of my evening, at least the part I hadn't planned in advance, came when I scrolled through my photos and found the one the rideshare app had snapped automatically. Her dot, his dot, same restaurant, same timestamp. I forwarded it to the contact labeled Lauren Pierce, CFO. She was Trent's partner. I'd met her once in passing at a holiday event. She'd shaken my hand with direct calm, the kind of handshake that made you want to sit straighter. She seemed like someone who appreciated clarity. Message attached. I think this is important for you to see. I didn't sign it. Didn't explain. Didn't add commentary. If she wanted context, she'd ask. With all that done, I took another slow sip of wine and looked around the rooftop. The lantern glow dimmed as the concierge began collecting items. I stepped aside and watched silently, almost detached, while someone dismantled the evening I had imagined for months. When they finished, the rooftop felt hollow, clean but hollow. I left the bottle behind, half full. The elevator took too long to arrive, or maybe time stretched out of politeness, giving me space to consider what would happen when she realized what I knew. I leaned against the rail inside the elevator, letting the gentle hum calm me. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. More like a simmering awareness of something breaking cleanly inside me. The doors opened to the lobby. I walked out, nodded to the night doorman, and headed down the street without any destination. The city air warmed my face, the faint smell of street food drifting from a nearby cart. Everything felt absurdly normal. People talked, laughed, hurried, loitered. I wondered how many of them had been blindsided by someone they trusted. I made it 2 blocks before my phone rang. I didn't pick up. Her name flashed 3 times, then another call, then messages. I ignored all of them. I wasn't ready to hear excuses. I was still too clear, too focused. I kept walking until my thoughts calmed into something colder. I returned home about an hour later, took a long shower, and let the steam fog the mirror. When I stepped out, another string of messages waited. A few from her. A few from Tyler, my old college friend who somehow thought it was his place to tell me to stay reasonable, though I hadn't responded to him either. I blocked the card access officially through the bank's app. They confirmed it with a neat little notification. Efficiency could be comforting when everything else unraveled. Around 9:20, I heard the elevator ding again. The hallway outside my apartment echoed with hurried footsteps. A few seconds later, someone knocked hard on my door. Then her voice, "Elias, please open, please." I didn't move. I leaned against the wall and listened to her breathing through the wood. Unsteady, sharp, like she was the one caught off guard. "Can we talk?" I swear it's not what it looks like, she said. I nearly laughed at that. The tired kind of laugh you can't quite let out because the absurdity sits too heavy. Instead, I stayed silent. She knocked again. Harder. Elias, please, just open. I rushed here the moment. Something about that sentence rubbed me the wrong way. The moment what? The moment I turned off the card? The moment I texted? The moment she realized Trent couldn't protect her from consequences outside work? I let her knock until her voice cracked from frustration. When she finally stepped back, her shadow moved away from the crack under the door. The elevator dinged again. I waited until everything settled. The next morning arrived quietly, as if nothing had happened. But everything had. I woke up feeling like my insides had rearranged overnight, not painfully, just with a new sense of structure, like cleaning out a drawer you didn't realize was cluttered. My phone buzzed with messages I ignored. I made coffee, watered the plants on the balcony, stared at the horizon for a while, letting the morning light wipe away the last traces of what I'd expected my life to look like. By midday, the narrative she must have shared with others began seeping back to me. A mutual acquaintance texted, "Heard you flipped out last night. Hope you're okay." Another chimed in with, "Maybe talk to her before making any more decisions." I didn't respond. I wasn't going to defend myself against a story she crafted to soften her own choices. I trusted the truth to surface the moment someone cared enough to look closely. Around mid-afternoon, the building manager sent confirmation that her access had been removed from the system entirely. She couldn't enter the residential floors anymore. I thanked him and went back to reviewing a project proposal, though the words blurred every few minutes. My phone lit up again. It wasn't her this time. It was Lauren Pierce. "Meet me. Now. You've started something and I'm not letting it slide." I stared at the message for a long moment before exhaling slowly. Not with panic or fear, just with quiet acknowledgement. Whatever was about to unfold wasn't random. It was a domino I'd tapped the moment I hit send. Maybe this was inevitable. Maybe I'd just finally stopped pretending. I grabbed my keys, slipped on my jacket, and headed out the door. The hallway felt cooler than usual, like the air shifted to make room for whatever came next. The elevator ride down seemed shorter this time, almost impatient, as if the building itself wanted to hear the next chapter. I didn't know what I'd tell her. I didn't even know what she wanted. But I wasn't walking into that meeting timid. Not anymore. I stepped onto the street, and the city, for once, felt like it was holding its breath. Lauren Pierce didn't bother choosing a public spot with soft lighting or comfortable chairs. She picked a small, corporate cafe in a building where security guards barely blinked as she walked past them. No warm pastries, no ambiance, just an echoing space with polished floors and the faint scent of burnt espresso. It fit her perfectly. She wasn't here for comfort. She was here for clarity. She sat in the corner, tapping her finger against a ceramic mug as though she'd been waiting exactly 4 minutes and didn't appreciate the time loss. The moment she saw me, she lifted her chin, motioning for me to sit down. No hello, no small talk. Just a cool acknowledgement, like she was confirming a suspect had finally shown up for questioning. "You started something," she said before I even settled into the chair. "So we're going to finish it." No nonsense. I respected that. I folded my hands on the table. "You saw the photo?" She nodded once. I did. "And before you ask, yes," I confronted him. A pause. Then, "He tried to pretend it was an innocent dinner." I raised an eyebrow. "He says I misunderstood?" "Of course he does," she said. "Men like him always start with excuses." Meanwhile, Jenna claimed it was a work-related meeting she didn't have time to explain. The room felt colder for a moment. Not from emotion, but from the sudden understanding that I had stepped into a situation already drifting for months, maybe longer. "She also complained you overreacted," Lauren added, making air quotes with a small flick of her fingers. which tells me she's more worried about losing access to things than losing you. I didn't respond. My silence must have been enough, because she leaned back slightly, studying me with the same expression she might use to evaluate a financial projection. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, lowering her voice. "Not as someone who has any stake in your personal life, but as someone who doesn't appreciate being lied to in her own house. This was not an isolated evening. There were lunches, meetings that weren't supposed to be meetings, whisper conversations in hallways. All of it played off as creative collaboration." I swallowed a quiet bitterness. None of this surprised me anymore. I had suspected, tucked the suspicions away, then buried them under optimism because optimism is easier to carry than disappointment. "You didn't hear this from me," she continued, "but I overheard Trent laughing with someone from Jenna's office 2 weeks ago. They said she wasn't certain about your direction anymore, whatever that means." I let out a slow breath, keeping my voice even. "I think I have a good guess." Lauren leaned in slightly. "Now tell me your side." So I did. Not everything, just the essential pieces: the rooftop, the text, the shared rideshare GPS, the decision to cut the card, cancel the ring, remove her from the lease. Through it all, Lauren nodded, occasionally smirking in approval. When I finished, she said, "Good, precise, clean." She tapped her mug again. "Now let me fill in the last gap." She slid her phone across the table. On the screen sat a photo she clearly took without Trent noticing. He sat laughing, leaning too close to Jenna, something in his hand pointed her way. The picture wasn't incriminating in the cinematic sense, but it was filled with the kind of micro-expressions that make everything obvious once you know the truth. "He used her as leverage," she said. "She used him for attention. I won't tolerate either." "So what are you planning?" "I'm not planning anything," she replied. "I'm correcting a pattern." Then she paused, eyes narrowing. "And I'm guessing you're planning something of your own." I didn't deny it. Didn't need to. She smiled very lightly, more like the idea of a smile than the real thing. "Well, that's your lane, and I don't cross into other people's lanes unless they force me." After another minute of silence, she stood and collected her bag. "Thank you for informing me. I appreciate early warnings." Then she touched my shoulder, just once, briefly. "And I'm sorry your evening was ruined. You deserved better." She left without glancing back. I sat there for another few minutes, trying to steady myself before standing. When I got outside, the air tasted sharper, the sidewalks more defined. I wasn't sure if I felt lighter or heavier. I just felt awake. As I made my way down the block, my phone buzzed again. A text from Tyler. "Man, we need to talk. Big misunderstanding." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Tyler always wanted to be in the middle of things he didn't understand. He enjoyed drama from the sidelines, convincing himself he was a mediator rather than the source of half the trouble. I decided not to respond. Instead, I walked home, lost in thought about what Lauren had said. The pieces fit together too cleanly, the lunches, the hints from Jenna about our different futures. Tyler's suspicious encouragement to her about keeping options open. The sudden shift in my relative's tone recently. Everyone had an opinion, and apparently none of them favored me. By the time I turned onto my street, my frustration had simmered into something sharper. Not rage, just a pointed awareness that too many people had assumed I wouldn't react, wouldn't defend myself, wouldn't demand basic respect. The next morning confirmed just how far the gossip had spread. I walked into the small breakfast place near my apartment, the one where I usually grabbed a coffee before work. The barista hesitated when she saw me, eyes flickering with that awkward recognition that means someone told her something she wished she hadn't heard. Behind me, 2 people whispered, glancing at me with sympathy that felt performative. I ordered anyway. While waiting for my drink, I checked my messages. A few from coworkers, a few from distant relatives, one from Aunt Mara. Hers read, "Heard about last night. Maybe if you'd been more flexible, she wouldn't have felt so pressured." I rubbed the spot between my eyes slowly. The kind of slow rub you do when you're deciding whether to engage or disengage for your own sanity. I chose silence again. Sometimes silence is louder than argument. When I walked out with my coffee, Wade, my cousin who'd always treated my tools and time like a free subscription, called me. "Hey man, I heard you kinda imploded last night," he said cheerfully. "Tough stuff. You probably shouldn't have gone all dramatic." I stopped walking. "You heard this from Jenna?" "Well, yeah," he said, as though the answer was obvious. "She said you freaked over a simple reschedule." "A simple reschedule?" I asked quietly. He cleared his throat. "I mean, it could happen to anyone, right? People get busy." I held the phone a moment longer in silence before hanging up without another word. Wade texted right after, "Whoa, rude." I didn't reply. I spent the next hour at work pretending everything was normal, emails, drawings, proposal edits. But my mind kept drifting. Not toward Jenna, surprisingly, but toward the entire circle of people who had taken her side without questioning anything. Tyler, Mara, Wade. None of them asked me what happened. None gave me benefit of the doubt. They just latched on to the story most convenient for their own comfort. Around noon, my manager asked for help setting up a site visit for a new project. I drove across town, parked near a row of warehouses, and was walking back to my car afterward when I spotted Wade's truck parked crookedly near an alley. The hood was open. He was rummaging through the back seat, tossing things around with impatience. "Seriously?" I muttered under my breath. He hadn't noticed me yet. I walked up slowly, tapping the side of his truck with my knuckles. He looked up, startled. "Oh, hey man, didn't know you were around here." "You borrowed my equipment," I said, 3 weeks ago." "Oh yeah, well, I've been meaning to return it. And you broke half of it." He froze. For the first time since this entire mess started, someone finally registered the expression I wore. It must not have been friendly. He swallowed. "Look, Elias, I can explain." I didn't give him the chance. I opened his back door, pulled the case with my tools out, and set it on the hood of his truck. Not gently. The thunk echoed loudly. He flinched. "You're returning all of it," I said. "Today," he sputtered. "You know, Jenna said you're kind of spiraling." I stepped forward. He stopped talking immediately. "I'm not interested in Jenna's commentary," I said calmly. "I'm interested in my property." He reached for the case to pull it toward him, muttering something I chose not to decipher. I walked away before I said something heavier than necessary. Behind me, he called out, "Man, what is your problem lately?" I didn't answer. He didn't deserve an answer. A few hours later, Tyler tried to corner me in a cafe. I'd stopped in to sit for a moment, not to think. Thinking wasn't the issue anymore. I needed a break from the noise, the messages, the swirling assumptions people kept making on my behalf. I had just set my coffee down when Tyler slid into the seat across from me, uninvited. "Okay, we need to clear the air," he said, hands lifted like he was soothing a frantic animal. I stared at him. "Clear what, exactly?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Man, Jenna told me you were planning some big evening. She said she panicked because things felt rushed. You can't blame her. You're intense sometimes." I blinked slowly. "Intense?" "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." He exhaled. "Look, I told her she should think things through. You know she gets overwhelmed. She said you've been pushing her toward a future she wasn't ready for." I let the silence stretch. He shifted uncomfortably. "You told her to keep her options open," I said finally. Tyler's eyes widened. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is you said it." He cleared his throat. "I was just giving advice." "You were giving permission," I corrected. He straightened defensively. "I didn't tell her to go out with someone else." No, but you made it sound forgivable. That's enough. The people at nearby tables were pretending not to listen. I could feel their ears tilting just slightly. The air had a certain static tension that made everything louder. You're being unfair, Tyler said. I've been a good friend. I leaned slightly closer. A good friend doesn't encourage cracks in someone else's life because it makes for interesting conversation later. He blinked, face reddening. That's not what I did. Isn't it? He opened his mouth, closed it again, then pushed out of the chair abruptly. You've changed, man. You're harsh now. Finally, I said. He left in a hurry. A few people stared after him. I took a sip of my coffee and stayed seated until the shaking energy in my chest settled. When I walked out of the cafe, the sky looked heavier, like the city was draped in a muted filter. I felt strangely steady, not calmer, but steadier, like the world had shifted exactly 1 inch to the right, and everything in my life now had sharper edges. I returned to work for a while, but my concentration was a mess. The conversations replayed themselves, Mara's text, Wade's excuses, Tyler's performance. Everyone had felt comfortable criticizing me without facts. Everyone had felt comfortable smoothing Jenna's narrative over mine. By the time I drove back to my building, I was past the point of letting their voices matter. I wanted quiet. I wanted my door closed. I wanted space from every person who had decided I was the simplest version of myself, the one who let things slide. But the moment I stepped into my lobby, the doorman waved me over. Mr. Monroe, he said gently. Someone's been pacing near the elevator for the last 10 minutes. She keeps checking the time. I knew who he meant before he said it, felt it in the shift of the air. I rounded the corner, and there she was, Jenna, standing stiffly near the elevator doors, hair slightly messy, a crease between her eyebrows. When she saw me, her face flickered with relief mixed with something uneasy. She stepped forward. Elias, finally. I've been trying to reach you for 2 days. I kept a polite distance. I saw the messages. She wrung her hands. Can we talk, please? I don't think we have anything to discuss. Yes, we do, she insisted, taking a small step closer. I swear that dinner wasn't... I raised a hand lightly. I know exactly what it was. She shook her head rapidly. It wasn't planned like that. I wasn't hiding. You were at a restaurant across town with someone you told me was harmless, and you told other people I pressured you into something. Her mouth tightened. That's not fair. Then don't ask me to treat it like it is. She opened her mouth again, then closed it, frustration rippling across her features. This is getting blown up into something dramatic, she muttered. Everyone is talking about it. Everyone, I echoed quietly, except the one person who should have talked to me. She froze. I moved past her toward the elevator. She turned as I passed, voice cracking. Can we please fix this? Just talk like normal? I looked at her evenly. Normal left 2 nights ago. She flinched at that. A tiny reaction, but enough to register. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. She didn't follow. As the doors slid shut between us, I realized something I hadn't been ready to admit even to myself. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was finished, and being finished was calmer than anything I'd felt in a long, long time. Lauren chose a different setting for our next meeting, which surprised me. Instead of a corporate cafe or some neutral lobby, she picked a small open-air terrace on the top level of a parking structure. It overlooked a row of commercial buildings and a narrow river strip cutting through the city. Not a pretty view, but an honest one. Exactly the sort of place where people who want to speak plainly choose to meet. When I arrived, she was standing near the edge, arms crossed, staring down at the slow-moving water. She turned when she heard my footsteps. You're punctual, she said. Good. You said it was important. It is. She motioned toward a bench. Sit. I sat. She didn't. Her posture was tight, almost rigid, like someone holding back the urge to pace. I talked to Trent again this morning, she said. He's trying to reframe everything as a misunderstanding, and he's also trying to convince me that Jenna exaggerated certain things about you." I raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" She stared at me carefully. "She told people you were using her contacts to improve your portfolio." I stilled. "She said you hinted she should introduce you to clients," Lauren continued. "She claimed she felt pressured, so she sought guidance from friends." The betrayal should have felt like a punch, but it didn't. It was more like a dim confirmation of things I had already suspected, but never voiced. "I've never asked for her contacts," I said evenly. "I figured as much," Lauren replied, "which is why I didn't tolerate his version of events. But I need you to understand something. Jenna has been prepping this fallback story for a while. It's why people defaulted to believing her. They were primed." I leaned back against the bench. The breeze carried a faint scent of river mud and car exhaust. Something about it grounded me, kept me from drifting into frustration. "She always did enjoy preemptive explanations," I said lightly. Lauren gave me a thin smile. "You have a calm way of processing all this." "Calm doesn't mean I'm not taking notes." She nodded once, as if approving my tone. "Good, because you're not the only one who's been watching patterns." She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, swiped through something, then held it out to me. "This might interest you." It was another photo, taken from across a room. Jenna and Trent again, sitting at a bar during what looked like a late afternoon break. His hand was close to hers, too close, and she wasn't pulling away. They were laughing, leaning in, sharing something that looked far more familiar than professional. "They weren't careful," Lauren said. "Not even a little." I stared at the image with detached clarity. I didn't feel a twist in my stomach, didn't feel my pulse spike. I simply felt something slow and steady inside me rearrange itself. "So, what's your plan?" I asked quietly. "My plan is to deal with my partner," she said. "Your plan, however, looks like it's expanding." She wasn't wrong. I hadn't fully articulated it even in my own head yet, but I could feel the threads pulling together. Threads tied to Jenna, to Trent, to Tyler, to my relatives. Everyone who had taken liberties with my name or my trust. A network of tiny betrayals woven into a net I hadn't noticed tightening until now. Lauren studied my expression. "I don't owe you advice, but I'll give you one suggestion. If you're going to expose her, do it cleanly, no mess, no inconsistency. Be smarter than the story she's selling." "I intend to," I said. She nodded, then turned slightly, glancing toward the ramp leading down. "Coming." I followed her gaze. A familiar figure strode up the ramp, Trent, moving quickly, scanning the terrace as though expecting a confrontation. His jaw was tight, his stride jerky. When he spotted us, he slowed, adopting an expression of forced casualness. "Really?" he said to Lauren as he approached. "You asked me to meet you here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped aside. "Talk to him," she said simply, pointing at me. Trent stared at me, clearly thrown. "What's this supposed to be?" I kept my voice even. "You've made several choices that intersected with my life. I wanted to see if you had anything honest to say." He scoffed softly. "Man, this is unnecessary. Jenna said you misunderstood the situation." "She also said I pressured her professionally," I replied. He blinked. "Well, she felt that way." "No, she framed it that way." He frowned, irritation crossing his features. "Look, this whole situation is getting exaggerated. You're making a bigger deal than it is." "Probably because it is one," I said. He opened his mouth to argue, but Lauren cut in sharply. "Stop talking, Trent." He froze. She stepped closer, her voice low and unmistakably firm. "You lied to me. You lied to your partner. You crossed boundaries with someone you thought wouldn't tell the truth." His face paled slightly. "Go," she said. "Now." He hesitated, then backed away, retreating down the ramp with a stiff walk. Lauren turned back to me. He'll feel that. Not enough to learn from it, but enough to remember it. I'm not done, I said quietly. Oh, I know, she replied. Which is why I'm stepping back now. Handle the rest your way. Then she walked off, leaving me alone on the terrace. I stayed there for a few minutes, letting the wind sweep through my hair, letting the scene settle into place like a puzzle piece snapping shut. I didn't need Lauren's involvement. I appreciated her clarity, but the path forward was mine. My next steps came to me instinctively, not out of impulse, but out of a sense of inevitability. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I waited in the shadowed corner of a parking structure near Jenna's office, not hiding, just waiting. People streamed out in small groups, coworkers laughing, others talking into headsets, a couple arguing softly. I leaned against a concrete pillar, hands in my jacket pockets, scanning faces until hers appeared. She walked briskly, her phone in hand, her expression tense, probably dealing with fallout at work already. Good. Actions ripple, words ripple, choices ripple. She had started the ripple. I was simply watching the waves return to her shore. She headed toward her car, third level, corner space. I followed at a distance, steps soundless on the concrete. When she turned the corner and reached her car door, I spoke. Interesting place for someone who hates confrontation. She gasped and spun around. Her keys slipped from her hand and clattered to the ground. She pressed her back against her car instinctively, eyes wide. Elias, what are you doing here? Finishing a conversation. She swallowed. I don't want to argue. This isn't an argument. I took 2 slow steps forward. She pressed herself tighter against the car. You created a narrative about me, I said. To your coworkers, to mutual friends, to my relatives. She shook her head quickly. I didn't. You framed me as controlling. You framed me as using you. You framed me as pushing you towards something you never wanted. I paused, then added, You also framed yourself as innocent. Her breath hitched. I never said innocent. You implied it. The parking structure hummed with faint engine noise from below. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows behind her car. Her voice came out thin. I was overwhelmed. I made mistakes. But I didn't think you'd go this far. You didn't think I would react, I corrected. There's a difference. She opened her mouth to speak, but I stepped forward suddenly and slapped my hand flat against the window beside her head, not touching her, but close enough to make her jump, not gentle, not rough, just firm. A reminder of proximity. Her eyes widened. Elias, you took advantage of my trust. Now you're learning I'm not the furniture you ignore when the room gets crowded. I lowered my hand and stepped back. She looked shaken, not terrified, not threatened, just shaken enough for truth to settle in. That was what I wanted. Not harm. Awareness. You need to clean up the story you spread, I said, or people will learn the version you don't want them to hear. She blinked rapidly. What does that mean? It means your coworker's partner knows everything now, and she isn't the forgiving type. Jenna's face stiffened at the name. Lauren? She's handling Trent. I'm handling everything else. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her keys. Please, don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said. You already did it. Then I walked past her, down the ramp, and out of the structure. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The echo of my footsteps behind me was enough. The next day brought confirmation that Jenna's professional circle had shifted. Someone from her office knew someone from Lauren's team. Stories reached the right ears. By noon, a coworker of hers posted vaguely online about questionable conflicts of interest, and I didn't have to guess who was at the center of it. Meanwhile, I had my own list to handle. Tyler first. He had a networking event scheduled at a boutique venue downtown, one he bragged about for days, claiming it would be his big breakthrough. I knew the venue manager from a landscaping project I'd supervised 2 years ago. When I walked in and asked to speak privately, he looked surprised, but not unwilling. "I'm not asking you to create trouble," I said. "I'm asking you to reconsider hosting someone who routinely manipulates clients for personal gain." I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I simply stated specific stories Tyler had told me, stories in which he boasted about exaggerating results to lure clients. The manager frowned. "We don't like hosting questionable behavior." That's exactly my point. 2 hours later, Tyler stormed into the lobby of the venue, voice high, demanding answers. The staff remained calm, simply informing him that his reservation had been canceled. He spun around when he spotted me standing near the corner. "You did this," he hissed. I stepped closer, voice low enough for only him to hear. "I don't raise my voice. I raise my standards." His face flushed. He sputtered something I didn't bother deciphering. I walked past him, unbothered by his frantic muttering. If he wanted to understand consequences, he could start here. Wade came next. I hadn't forgotten the dent I left in his truck hood or the panic in his voice when confronted. But there was still an imbalance to fix. He had been preparing for a community event where he usually showcased equipment he borrowed from me. Equipment he had damaged. Equipment he bragged about as though it were his own. That morning, I delivered every broken tool to him in front of a crowd, stacking it at his feet without ceremony. People turned to look. Some laughed quietly. Wade's face burned as he stammered excuses. I didn't stay long. I didn't need to. The visual was enough. By late afternoon, the day felt strangely quiet, not peaceful, but clarified. The threads had aligned. The pieces were moving. Everyone who had meddled or lied or dismissed me was experiencing the first tremors of accountability. I walked home slowly, letting the city's hum surround me. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't congratulating myself. I simply felt present, more present than I had been in months. When I reached my building, the concierge waved me over with a hesitant look. "Mr. Monroe," he said, "someone's been waiting in the lobby for you." I turned. There she was, Jenna, standing near the glass entrance, hands gripping her purse strap, eyes red-rimmed, expression tangled between anger and desperation. She stepped forward quickly. "Elias," she said in a strained voice, "you need to stop. I'm not doing anything. You're destroying my life." "No," I corrected quietly. "You're experiencing the effects of your choices." Her breathing hitched. "Please, please, we can talk. Fix this. Just stop." Outside, a car horn blared faintly in the distance. Inside, only her uneven breathing filled the space between us. I looked at her through the glass door separating us. "You had your evening," I said gently. "This one is mine." Her face crumpled, and I walked past the front desk, into the elevator, leaving her behind as the doors slid shut. The invitation arrived with the kind of polite digital sparkle corporate events love to use: soft gradients, a scripted font, a promise of complimentary hors d'oeuvres. I almost closed it out of habit, ready to delete it alongside the usual newsletters and spam from home improvement stores. Then I saw the venue listed at the top of the email. Rooftop. My building. Thursday, 7 p.m. I remembered the last time I stood on that rooftop, the candles flickering, the wine chilling, the skyline stretching out like an open palm. A perfect scene waiting for someone who never arrived. A version of myself waiting for someone who never chose to show up. Seeing that same rooftop in the invitation felt like the universe tapping my shoulder deliberately. Not gently, not cruelly, just firmly enough to make me turn my head and pay attention. I didn't hesitate. I clicked accept. Not because I needed the social event. Not because I wanted to network over miniature bruschetta. I accepted because something inside me understood that returning to that rooftop wasn't optional. It was necessary. A loop needed closing. The days leading up to Thursday passed with a strange, charged clarity. My phone buzzed less. People stopped sending unsolicited advice, emotional check-ins, or half-hearted, "Are you okay?" texts. Silence can be a gift, and that week it felt like someone finally wrapped one for me. On Thursday evening, I stood in front of my mirror, fixing my collar. I didn't dress to impress. That wasn't the goal. I chose clothes that felt like me. Nothing flashy, nothing timid. A dark jacket, a clean shirt, shoes that carried more miles of quiet resolve than polished shine. Before heading out, I looked at my reflection one last time, not for vanity, but for recognition. The person staring back wasn't the same man who waited under candlelight days before. Something in my posture had changed. Shoulders steadier, eyes more direct, jaw relaxed instead of tense. Not harder. Clearer. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt strangely smooth, almost ceremonial. When the doors opened, soft light spilled inside, accompanied by gentle music drifting across the open space. Guests mingled in clusters, glasses in hand, voices blending into a polite hum. Servers navigated the space with trays of carefully constructed appetizers, each one too tiny to feel like food but ornate enough to impress Instagram. Several faces turned when I stepped out, some in recognition, some in curiosity, some in that subtle, pity-flavored sympathy people give when they think they know your story. I ignored all of them and walked toward the railing. The sky had shifted into one of those pastel twilight gradients, lavender fading into muted blue, streaked with the last remnants of sunset. The city below pulsed steadily. Cars moved like organized currents, lights flicked on in neat patterns, pedestrians crossed intersections in waves. I rested my hands on the railing and breathed in the familiar rooftop air, cooler than ground level, touched by a hint of evening breeze that carried faint traces of someone's perfume and the sharp scent of appetizers. I didn't realize how much I needed this view until I stood there again. The last time I looked over this railing, I stood with hope. Tonight, I stood with closure. I had maybe 10 seconds of quiet before a voice cut through the hum of conversations. "Elias?" Not harsh, not warm, just surprised. I turned. Tyler. He wore a blazer too bright for the setting, something that looked picked for attention rather than fit. His expression flickered between awkward defensiveness and faux confidence, as if he'd practiced a dozen lines on the ride up and abandoned all of them the moment he saw my face. "You've been ignoring my calls," he said. "We should talk." I kept my hands on the railing. "No, you should talk." He blinked with that confused innocence he used whenever he pretended not to understand his own involvement in something. "Okay, well, look," he said, lowering his voice like he was a secret agent. "That venue cancellation was out of line." "It was accurate," I replied. He shook his head, looking around nervously. "Not the point. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself." A few nearby guests glanced over, their attention flickering between us. Tyler swallowed. "Can we talk somewhere private?" he whispered sharply. "No." His posture faltered. He wasn't used to walls that didn't bend for him. "You can't just do this in front of people," he hissed. "That's funny," I said. "You didn't mind doing things behind my back." He opened his mouth to protest, but I leaned slightly closer. "A good friend doesn't stir uncertainty where trust should be," I said softly. "A good friend doesn't encourage someone to undervalue what they have, and a good friend doesn't add friction to someone else's life just because it makes for an entertaining conversation." His expression shattered into red-cheeked embarrassment. He glanced around again, saw a few guests watching, and straightened stiffly. "You've changed," he muttered. "Yes," I said. I finally removed everyone's hands from the steering wheel. He blinked, unsure how to respond, then turned sharply and walked away, too fast to appear composed, too slow to escape the moment. I exhaled through my nose and returned my gaze to the city. That was the first wave. The second came too quickly. I heard hurried footsteps behind me, a sloppy, uncoordinated rhythm that could only belong to one person. Wade. "Elias!" he called out, sounding winded. "Hey, we gotta talk!" I closed my eyes for a brief second. The universe doesn't always have subtle timing. He arrived in front of me in a shirt that still had folds like it had been unfolded minutes earlier from a department store bag. He pointed at me with exaggerated frustration. "That thing you pulled at the community event? Not okay, man." "You made promises you didn't keep," I said. "You used things you didn't own. People learned the truth. But you didn't have to make a show out of it." "You made a show when you told people I was overreacting," I said calmly. "And when you took my things without considering their value. And when you assumed I'd always be the cousin who didn't speak up." He flinched. That landed somewhere deep. "I didn't think this would blow up," he muttered. "Everyone's talking." "Let them. They think you've gone cold. I've gone honest." He paused, chest rising quickly. "Look, man, it wasn't personal. It was to me." That broke him more than anything else I said. He ran a hand through his hair, looking around helplessly. "I don't know what's happening with you lately. You're seeing me without the parts that catered to everyone else's expectations." He stared, confused. I didn't explain further. He left slowly, shaking his head, mumbling the kind of sentence people say when they think the ground shifted under them without warning. 2 waves down. The rooftop's hum returned around me. Music, distant chatter, clinks of glasses. But the calm didn't last. There was a shift behind me, one I recognized instantly. Not sound, not movement, just presence. Jenna. She approached wearing a charcoal dress and a cool expression that didn't quite mask the strain underneath. Her posture was poised in a way that suggested she practiced it in a mirror before coming. Her hair was smoothed perfectly, her expression controlled. Except for the eyes. Her eyes told the real story. "Elias," she said, voice steady. I turned my head slightly. "You shouldn't be here." I was invited. "So were they," I said, glancing toward Tyler and Wade, who were both pretending not to stare in our direction while failing spectacularly. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly. "I just want to talk." "You don't want to talk," I replied. "You want to reverse the consequences." Her lips parted slightly. "That's not fair." "You're right," I said. "It's accurate." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to keep the conversation between us. "You've taken this too far." "No," I corrected softly. "I've matched the distance you introduced." Her jaw tightened. "People at work are turning cold. I'm losing accounts. They keep asking questions." "I wonder why," I said. "You know why." "I do," I said, "because you built a story that fit your convenience. And now the truth is rewriting your version." Her shoulders stiffened. "I never meant for things to fall apart like this." "But you did mean to protect yourself from the truth," I said. "That's why you told people I pressured you. That's why you implied I used you professionally. You wanted a shield." She froze for half a second. The guilt flickered, then vanished under practiced composure. "You're twisting my intentions," she said. "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally recognizing them." The wind swept gently between us. Not dramatic, just present. Like the rooftop itself was listening for once. She looked at me, brows knitted. "You miss what we had. I know you do." "What I miss," I said evenly, "is the version of myself that hadn't realized how lopsided things were." She blinked, taken aback. "What does that even mean?" she whispered. "It means," I said, "that I used to carry the weight you placed on me. Now I've set it down." A small shift happened in her posture. Her shoulders dipped, her chin lowered slightly, her breath stuttered. Can we please fix this?" she asked. Talk like we used to? Get back to normal? Normal wasn't honest, I said. It was comfortable for you. It was silent for me. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I didn't know you felt this way. Because you didn't ask, I said gently. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with realization. Raw, unpolished realization. The kind that isn't dramatic but strikes deep. She stepped back, a tiny motion that felt like the final cord snapping. So that's it? She whispered. That's it. Her breath caught. She nodded once, stiffly. Then she turned, and for the first time since I'd known her, she walked away without looking back. The third wave, and the last one I needed. I stayed at the railing after Jenna walked away. Not because I needed time to recover or gather strength, but because the wind felt different now, lighter, almost like the tension threaded through the air had finally loosened. The skyline stretched out before me with its usual quiet confidence. It didn't judge, didn't gossip, didn't assume. It just existed. I envied that sometimes, but tonight, I felt closer to that simplicity than I had in a long while. I closed my eyes for a moment. Behind my eyelids, the noise of the rooftop dimmed, replaced by the memory of the night I'd waited here with candles and chilled wine. That version of me felt distant now, like someone I remembered from a story rather than someone I had been. Hopeful, open, vulnerable because he believed the people in his life deserved unfiltered trust. Now I stood differently, not hardened, just recalibrated, as if my internal compass had finally pointed to true north instead of the magnetic pull of other people's expectations. I opened my eyes and exhaled slowly, but the moment I thought the night had quieted, someone else approached, not with hurried steps like Wade, not with forced nonchalance like Tyler, and not with the conflicted tension Jenna carried. This presence moved with steadiness, measured, intentional. Mr. Monroe, a voice said, calm and composed. I turned to see the building manager, Greg, standing a few feet from me. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, always carrying himself like he was managing a hotel instead of an apartment complex. Just wanted to check in, he said. Everything okay this evening? I studied him for a moment, wondering if someone had asked him to intervene. Everything's fine. He nodded once, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in his eyes. Events like these tend to stir more conversation than usual. Some of the guests seem animated. Just a few misunderstandings, I said lightly. Nothing to worry about. He smiled politely. Understood. If you need anything or want privacy, I can close off the north corner of the deck for you. I appreciated that. Not the privacy, but the offer. Kindness without intrusion is a rare skill. Thank you, I said. I'm okay. He gave a small nod and stepped away. The exchange was brief, but it grounded me again. Not everyone around me had expectations or assumptions. Some people existed on the periphery of your life with no interest in controlling your narrative. Those were the people worth noticing. I returned my gaze to the skyline, but it seemed the universe wasn't done sending echoes tonight. From behind me, I heard a soft intake of breath, a kind of hesitant sound people make when approaching with uncertainty. I turned, half expecting another confrontation, but instead found a familiar face from the building's board, a woman named Nora. She offered a polite smile. I hope you don't mind if I say something. I braced myself but nodded. I've lived in this building for over a decade, she said, and I've seen all kinds of dramas unfold. She waved her hand lightly. It's amazing what people will gossip about when the elevator gives them 10 seconds of free space. I huffed a small laugh. Sounds accurate. I heard a lot of it, she continued. Bits and pieces from the wrong mouths. She paused, choosing her next words. But I also heard how calmly you handled yourself these last few days. I didn't reply. I wasn't sure there was anything to say. She took a small sip from her glass before continuing. Most people react with chaos when they feel blindsided. You didn't. You clarified. Cleanly. Not everyone agrees with you, I said. That's because not everyone can accept that their version of you was convenient, not true. Her candor surprised me. I studied her face, trying to understand what she expected in return. But she simply smiled. "You'll be fine," she said gently. "People who don't flinch at the truth always are." She gave me a small nod and walked away. And just like that, something in my chest loosened. Not validation, just recognition. Someone who saw without the distortion of gossip or bias. Someone who hadn't decided what I was supposed to be based on a single narrative. I stood alone again, the music drifting softly behind me. It was then, looking out at the city, that I finally allowed myself to reflect. Not on the betrayals, not on the confrontations, but on the strange clarity that had surfaced during all of it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I wasn't vindicated. What I felt was quieter, sharper. Something like a boundary forming where I should have built one years ago. Maybe that's what happens when you stop trying to be someone's anchor and start being your own. I didn't get long to enjoy the thought because the elevator dinged behind me again. I didn't turn, not right away. The footsteps that followed were muted but confident, and then a voice spoke, low, cool, familiar. "You handled that well." I turned slowly. Lauren. She stood in a simple black blouse, hair pulled back, posture as steady as ever. Her presence didn't carry drama, it carried precision. "You came," I said. "Of course," she replied. "Someone needed to witness the finale." "I didn't plan this," I said. "Not the event, not the timing." "I know," she said. "Good stories don't always follow schedules." I found myself smiling faintly. "This wasn't a story." "It was," she said. "Just not the kind you were expecting to live." She stepped closer, her gaze moving across the deck where Tyler lingered at the bar, where Wade attempted to blend into a conversation he clearly didn't belong in, where Jenna had already left. "You closed every door yourself," she said. "Most people need the universe to slam them shut for them." I didn't want chaos. "And you didn't create any," she said simply, "which is impressive, considering the mess you walked into." She paused, then looked at me with a level, assessing gaze. "How do you feel?" I didn't answer immediately. The question wasn't casual. She wanted the truth, so I gave it. "Lighter," I said. "Not relieved, just lighter." She nodded. "Makes sense." Then, in a surprising softening of her tone, she added, "You know, most people don't change like this. Not effectively. They either sink into resentment or pretend everything is fine and carry it until it crushes them." "That's never been my style," I said. "No, it hasn't." She leaned her elbows on the railing beside me and looked out at the city. We stood in silence for a few seconds, the comfortable kind, not the tense kind that waits for an explosion. Finally, she spoke again. "Do you know why I stepped back after confronting Trent?" she asked. "I figured you didn't want to mix business with this." "That's part of it," she said. "But the real reason is simpler." She turned her head slightly toward me. "You had your own course, your own reckoning to conduct, and it wasn't my place to interfere." I considered that. "Most people try to step in," I said, "or try to guide you." "You didn't need guidance," she replied. "You needed clarity, and you found it." Her gaze returned to the city. "And," she added lightly, "you delivered consequences more effectively than most managers I've supervised." I let out a small breath, not a laugh, just a subtle release of tension. That's one way to put it. Another soft breeze swept across the rooftop, lifting the corner of a tablecloth and brushing past us. The event lights glowed warmly behind us, framing the moment with an unintentional kind of gentleness. Lauren straightened. Well, she said, I'll leave you to enjoy the view. You earned a moment of stillness. She began to walk away, but paused when she reached the center of the deck. She turned her head, just slightly. Good work tonight, she said. Good work overall. Then she left without waiting for a response. I stood at the railing again, letting her words settle, not as praise but as acknowledgement, a clean, understated punctuation mark on a sentence that had started on a very different night. The rooftop felt bigger now, not because people had moved away, but because I wasn't carrying the weight that once filled the space around me. The air felt surprisingly warm for evening, wrapping gently around me like a reassurance I hadn't expected. The city lights blinked below, steady and indifferent. I let myself breathe it in. And for the first time since everything began, the rooftop didn't feel like a reminder of what I lost. It felt like the start of what I'd finally reclaimed. After Lauren left, I stayed at the railing for a while, letting the sounds of the rooftop blend into a distant murmur. It was funny. When I first stepped onto this rooftop earlier in the evening, I expected tension, uncertainty, maybe even a lingering ache. But now, with each passing moment, the weight that once lived in my chest felt further away, fading like echoes in a room whose door had finally been closed. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. The feeling was simpler, more grounded. The quiet certainty that I had reclaimed control over a life that had drifted out of my hands without me noticing. I looked around the rooftop. People had started to relax again now that the confrontations were over. Conversations resumed, laughter returned, polite, curated laughter, the kind people bring to charity events. The clinking of glassware floated through the air, and serving staff moved between clusters of guests with trays of appetizers that looked too artistic to taste good. I watched it all with the detached clarity of someone who wasn't trying to belong anymore. I wasn't performing. I wasn't defending. I wasn't explaining. For the first time in a long while, I was simply observing. A man in a navy suit approached to offer me a drink, a tall glass with something citrusy inside. I thanked him and accepted, not because I needed it, but because refusing would draw more unwanted attention. I took a sip, letting the tartness settle on my tongue. Then I took another slow breath and turned back toward the city. The skyline had darkened fully now, illuminated by thousands of windows flickering with warm interior light. A few small boats drifted along the river, leaving faint ripples behind them. Streetlights stretched into the distance like soft beacons. The city never slept, but tonight it felt calmer, as if even its restless energy had given me a moment of peace. I didn't hear the next set of footsteps approach until the person was already beside me. Thought you'd be up here. I turned. It wasn't Tyler. It wasn't Wade. It wasn't Jenna, thank the universe. It was someone I hardly expected. The concierge from the lobby, Liam. Young, quiet, always polite, but a little timid in the way people are when they haven't yet figured out where they fit in the world. He stood at a respectful distance, hands clasped in front of him. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said softly. I wanted to say something." I nodded once. "Go ahead." He hesitated, glancing around as though making sure no one else was listening. "I saw her earlier," he said. "Jenna." I didn't respond. He continued. "She was upset. Not dramatic, but shaken. She kept saying she didn't recognize you anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something she'd say." He shrugged gently. I didn't feel it was my place to say anything then. But after watching tonight, after seeing the way everything unfolded, he drew a slow breath. "I don't think you changed. I think everyone else underestimated you." The simplicity of the statement made it more sincere. I gave him a small nod. "Thank you." He nodded back, relief crossing his face. "Just wanted to say that." With that, he walked away, returning to the elevator, disappearing from the rooftop with the same quiet grace he always carried. I returned to my spot at the railing, feeling the breeze brush against my face. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. If the rooftop had a memory, it would remember the night of the candles, the careful planning, the hope, the waiting. But tonight, it would remember me leaving on my own terms. I opened my eyes again and took in the view. The moment felt suspended, neither ending nor beginning, but something in between. A pause that wasn't empty. A pause filled with clarity. Behind me, someone else stepped closer. I didn't need to turn. "Can I stand here?" the person asked gently. It was Nora, the board member who had spoken earlier. "Of course," I said. She joined me at the railing, leaving just enough space to be respectful without being distant. We didn't speak at first. She simply watched the skyline with me, her presence quiet, unobtrusive. "You know," she said eventually, "most people go through something like this and lose a part of themselves. I think you found a part of yourself instead." I hummed a soft acknowledgement. "You were never loud," she continued. "Never the type to dominate a room, but tonight you showed a different kind of strength. The calm kind. The kind that doesn't ask for attention. Attention never appealed to me." "Then don't let anyone convince you that you need to chase it," she said. "Some people build their identity on noise. You build yours on stillness." Stillness. It wasn't a word I would have chosen for myself before tonight. But now, hearing it aloud, it felt accurate, not passive, not weak, steady. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. She smiled gently. "Enjoy the rest of your evening." She walked away, leaving me once again in my own quiet corner of the rooftop. The music shifted to something slower. The city air cooled further. For a moment, the rooftop felt like it belonged solely to me. The lights, the breeze, the view. Even the memories felt more distant, like old photographs tucked into a drawer rather than wounds that still ached. I didn't hear the next person approach, but I sensed it. Just a faint shift in the air, a presence that wasn't intrusive, wasn't urgent. When I turned my head, I found Lauren standing a few feet away again. Except she wasn't here to observe. She wasn't here to comment. She was here to close something. "You ready to go?" she asked. I blinked. "You're leaving?" "Eventually," she said, stepping closer. "But I wanted to see if you wanted the final word tonight." "The final word?" She nodded. "You confronted the 3 people who needed confronting. But sometimes the final moment belongs to you, not them." I understood what she meant. Confrontation wasn't the end. Choice was. "I'm ready," I said. She gestured toward the elevator with a slight tip of her head. "Then let's leave this rooftop behind. Let it be what it needs to be. A memory, not a weight." I didn't move immediately. Instead, I turned to look out at the skyline one last time. Not with longing, not with regret, just with acknowledgement. This rooftop marked the place where the story shifted from expectation to truth, from silence to clarity, from weight to release. It wasn't a chapter of heartbreak. It was a chapter of awakening. Finally, I stepped back from the railing. The city lights shimmered below as though saluting a version of myself I no longer needed to be. I walked toward the elevator. Lauren fell into step beside me, quiet, composed, respectful of the moment. The rooftop lights glowed behind us, casting long shadows across the wooden deck. The soft murmur of conversations trailed off as the elevator doors opened with a gentle chime. I stepped inside. Lauren held the door for half a second, then released it. The doors slid shut, sealing the rooftop and everything attached to it, on the other side. The descent was smooth, quiet, steady. When the elevator reached the lobby and the doors opened, the air felt noticeably warmer, softer, as if the building itself recognized the shift. I walked out with a calm I hadn't felt in months. No weight, no confusion, just clarity. And as I crossed the lobby floor, leaving the rooftop far above me, I realized something simple and undeniable. The story didn't end on that rooftop. I did. The part of me that waited, tolerated, and minimized himself. He stayed up there, somewhere among the candles that once flickered for a future that no longer existed. The version that walked out of the building into the cool night air, he wasn't waiting for anything anymore. He was ready. And that was the real ending.